to render unto you those things. We love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Good morning, friends. I'm glad that you're here. Turn in your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians 10. We got a fun one today. And by fun, I mean not fun at all. I mean the opposite of fun. It's going to be good, though. You'll like it. 1 Corinthians 10. We're still in our popular series, going through the most popular verses in the Bible. And so our popular verse today, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, and it reads something like this. Paul writes, "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation He will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it." That's our popular verse for today, and you might not even recognize that verse. You may be like, I've never heard that verse in my life, and that is probably because this verse is very often misquoted, and the misquoted version is more popular than the actual version. You've probably heard it said, God will never give you more than you can handle. Anybody ever heard somebody say that? Yeah. Anybody ever heard it? Yeah. Anybody ever heard God will never give you more than you could bear? Or have you ever said that to somebody? It's very popular. The verse doesn't actually say that, but that's the version that is popular. God won't ever give you any more than you can handle. I'm not trying to ruin anybody's day today. Of course, it's already been kind of somber. The verse doesn't say that. The verse says that God will not allow you to be tempted to sin in a way that is beyond your ability to stand up under, but it doesn't say that God will never put you in circumstances that are too much for you to bear, that God will never make you walk through things in your life that are too much for you to bear. As a matter of fact, I think God actually prefers to give us things that are more than we can bear. So, band, y'all can come back up, and you're welcome. You're welcome. The Bible never... Unfortunately, I wish this were not the case. The Bible never promises that God will not give you more than you can bear. The Bible never says that God will not put you in situations that bring you to the end of your rope. The Bible never says that God will not lead you down paths that take you past your threshold for pain tolerance. The Bible never says that God will give you more than you can handle. I'm really not trying to be a downer here, and the sermon today is not just debunking that, okay? We're talking about something deeper than that, but I think the truth is that it's really often that God allows us to walk through trials that are more than we can handle. I mean, that's just kind of the way the world works. I feel like I'm a pretty capable human being. I have 2 kids that I haven't managed to kill yet. I've kept them alive so far. I am financially, like I'm paying my bills. If something at my house breaks, I feel like I could fix it. Like I kind of pride myself on being like, I'm a somewhat capable individual. And yet, it seems like most of the things that life throws at me lately, I just am left with this response of like, I can't fix that. I don't know how anybody could fix that. I don't know. This is too much that I can't handle this. I see a lot of things. What we've talked about today being one of them. The situation with the immigration status, with a lot of the people in this room, and I'm like, that's too much. Most of the struggles in my life, I assure you, are more than I can bear. I can't fix it. I don't have the power. I used to think I had the power, but I don't. And I would imagine that those of you in here who have a little bit of self-awareness are probably the same. And it's not that God is mean-spirited and He's just kind of like, all right, I'm going to see where their breaking point is. Let's see how much it takes for them to crack. I don't think God is just actively like putting more on us than we can bear. But the fact is that God doesn't wish trials on us. God doesn't tempt us or test us, but God does turn those things. He does use those things to form us more into His image, to form us more into His likeness. That's a gift, even though it doesn't feel like one. We're being formed by our trials into people who are more able to abide in Him. So, yeah, that's the popular version that you've heard. That's not actually what it says. But as is the case with all the other verses we've done so far, this verse is popular because it's good. Even though the wrong version is more popular than the right version, it's popular because it's good and there is a promise in it for us. And hear me say this. I'm not just making this up. This sermon, this verse, this word, I think it's for all of us, but I think there's somebody in this room that this one is for. So be listening. The promise in this verse is not that God will never allow us to go through circumstances that are more than we can bear. The promise is that God will never allow us to be tempted to just fall off the wagon, to sin, to fall off the narrow path in a way that is beyond our ability to handle. And that's a beautiful promise, friends. It really is. The more you think about it, the more beautiful it is. I'm serious. This road that we are walking, you're here because you're trying to walk the narrow way. You're trying to follow Jesus, and this road is very narrow. This path that leads to life, it's very windy, very narrow. There are all kinds of temptations and distractions that threaten to take you off of it. But we can take heart because these temptations, hear me, these temptations that we are all facing, that at times feel so unbeatable, so unconquerable, these patterns that we repeat in our lives, these addictions that we have that we feel like we will never get control of, they are beatable. That's the promise of this verse. That's the promise to the Corinthian church, and it's a promise that we can hang on to. And building on the foundation that Brock built on last week of generational curses, we can be the kind of people that these patterns that repeat throughout the generations, they can break with us. We could break these cycles. So our goal for today is the same goal we've had this whole series. We want to take this popular verse, we want to put it in context, right? And so to do that, at the very least, we're going to have to start at the beginning of 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And I say at the very least because in 1 Corinthians, Paul is making these big, long arguments and addressing these big, bad things that are happening in the Corinthian church. And he is on one topic from 1 Corinthians 8 through the end of 1 Corinthians 10, addressing these people like eating food sacrificed to false idols. And so to really put it in context, you got to read chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 10. We're not going to do that today because we don't have time. But I do think we could get a handle on the, chapter 10 leading up to it. So the first 13 verses of chapter 10. So we're going to back it up, Terry, and we're going to read it. I'm glad some of y'all got that. So we're going to start in verse 1 of 1 Corinthians 10, and we're going to get a little bit more context. So here we go. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did. And 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, let anyone who thinks he stands take heed, lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. Okay, so our main verse for today, our popular verse, chapter 10, verse 13, has three main chunks in it, okay? You've got no temptation has overtaken you that's not common to man. That's the first chunk. Then you've got God's faithful. He won't allow you to be tempted beyond your ability. And then the last chunk, you've got God will provide you with the way of escape to endure it, okay? Three chunks. We're going to address it in those chunks. So those are going to be kind of our sections. If you're a note taker, if you're trying to figure out my outline form, that's it. So first, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but so those verses that we read leading up to this verse, they have a lot to do with what I preached on last time. I mean, they reference the snakes in the desert story from Numbers 21. Y'all remember that? A lot of this Israel in the wilderness stuff, it references. I feel like God's kind of like given me this thread to keep pulling on, and I'm just pulling on it and seeing where it goes. And so that's a big reason I'm preaching on this today, is I've just kind of ended up here. But the backdrop is this Old Testament imagery, okay? And when Paul says in verse 13, again, our verse that we're studying, when he says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to all mankind, he's basically saying to his readers, you're not going through any temptation that those who came before you did not also have to go through. You're not going through anything that's new. There's no temptation, there's no new temptation under the sun. That's why he makes this list of things that the wandering people in the wilderness did wrong, and he's saying, don't do this as they did, because they were tempted in the same ways that the Corinthian church is. And look at verse 1 too. I think this is interesting. Look at what Paul calls the people in the wilderness. Keep in mind, he's writing to Corinthian people, Greek, Roman people, not Jewish people, and look at what he says. Verse 1, I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers in the wilderness. Interesting that he's talking about ancient Jews, ancient Hebrews, and he is writing to Greeks and Romans, and he still treats the people in the wilderness as their forefathers. It's like Paul is saying, like, hey, no matter where we come from, Jew or Gentile, we all share this common spiritual heritage as the people of God in the story of God. The people in the wilderness, even if you're a Greek, those are your ancestors in the kingdom of God. But even though those people in the wilderness were the people of God, look at what he says in verse 5 and 6. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown or made low in the wilderness. And these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. So again, first part of our verse, no temptation has come upon you that is not common to mankind. He's saying to the Corinthian church, this is nothing new. And then he lists 4 sins committed by the people in the wilderness. And these are not just 4 random sins that Paul just like feels like, I think I want to harp on sexual immorality right at this point in the letter. Like, these are not random. This is intentional. This is an argument that he's making. Intentional, targeted statements that are relevant to the people that he is writing to, the Corinthian church. These are 4 ways that the wilderness generation in the Old Testament failed, and Paul is urging them, hey, they failed in this way. Please don't fail in the same way. Please don't do what they did. And he gives those 4 things to us, just bang, 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 in verses 7, 8, 9, and 10. Look at them. Verse 7, do not be idolaters as some of them were. Verse 8, we must not indulge in sexual immorality as some of them did. Verse 9, we must not put Christ to the test as some of them did. And verse 10, nor grumble as some of them did. The sin, the consequence. The sin, the consequence. 4 times. idolatry, sexual immorality, grumbling, putting God to the test. These are some of the things, not all, that the people in the wilderness did that served to kind of severed their relationship with God, that took them off of the path, that ultimately destroyed a lot of people. And Paul is saying, they dealt with this, they succumbed to it, don't make the same mistakes that they did. And again, these are really intentional. These are targeted, okay? It's not just 4 random sins. To really put this in context, we have to think about who Paul is writing to. We have to think about the target audience of the book, right? So, the church in the city of Corinth. Ancient 1st century Corinth. It's a port city, kind of in Greece. In the Roman Empire, it was very Roman, very Greek, very secular. It was a very cosmopolitan port city. It was lively. It was known for its parties and its culture. It was known for religious pluralism. It was kind of this melting pot where people of, the Greek religion and the Roman religion and all this other stuff got kind of mixed together. Corinth was known to have lots of temples to both Roman gods and Greek gods in it. And people would worship at these. They would, worship at the temple of Poseidon, or they would worship at the temple of wherever. And they would sacrifice animals there, and they would burn it at the altar, and then they would eat the meat at these dinner parties at these temples. There would also be, in some of the temples, there would be like temple prostitutes in the temple, and like at these dinner parties, like one way that you could worship that particular god would be to engage with these temple prostitutes. And so listen to this, okay? The Corinthian people, one of the whole reasons that 1 Corinthians is written is they are struggling to be Jesus people, struggling to be Messiah people in the context of the culture that they lived in. They were struggling to differentiate themselves from the city that they found themselves in. They were falling into participating into those cultural things that were against God's will for them. And they were using the pervasiveness of sin in their culture to justify their behavior. They were saying, like, how can we not have anything to do with idol worship when that is part of what it means to be a Corinthian? How can we have monogamous, self-sacrificial, life-giving, godly marriages when sexual pluralism is part of what it means to be Corinthian? How can we, and they're testing God by saying like, well, I mean, we keep doing these things. God hadn't punished us yet, so must not be a big deal. Let's keep doing them. And then they say like, why would God put these outdated, unrealistic expectations on us anyway? He doesn't know, like, things are different for us than they were for people back then. Things are different now. They were using the culture that they were placed in as an excuse and as a license to keep practicing the things that were destroying them ultimately. They were using the secularism and modernity of the culture that they were embedded in to justify giving into the temptations that they were fighting against. And we do the same thing. Our culture is real secular, probably more so than back then. I mean, we don't have temples with temple prostitutes and stuff, but we have other stuff that's crazy. And many of us do this same thing. We do these mental gymnastics in our brains, and we use the pervasiveness of depravity in our culture to justify us not being any different from the people that don't know Jesus and are not living in submission to His way. We say things like, the world is different now. And we use that as an excuse to not live like renewed people. We use that as an excuse to live for our own passions just like everybody else does. We question if it's even reasonable for God to put these seemingly outdated expectations on us in the culture that we find ourselves in. We say things like, how could you possibly keep the biblical ethic of sex and marriage in a culture that is the way it is? How could that be a reasonable expectation for God to put on us? We say things like, how could you possibly be expected to not have lustful eyes, to not use pornography when it is available at all times, anywhere on the phone in your pocket? Like, how could you be expected to not succumb to that in this day and age? We say things like, How can I possibly be a person of peace in the world when the news cycles never end and there's never any shortage of things to be scared about? We say things like, how could we possibly be expected to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us when our enemies are this bad? How could we possibly do that? How could you possibly be honest and a person of integrity when the world is built on greed the way it is and it's just a big machine? How can you be expected in the culture that we're in to walk in Jesus' way? And we use our culture as an excuse to kind of write off what God has called us to. And Paul is saying to them, these temptations that you are facing in the context of first century Corinth or 21st century United States, it is still the 21st century, right? I think so. He's saying these temptations that you're facing, they're not new. They're not unique. They go back to the beginning of time. They might look a little different in some ways, but it's the same thing. Don't let the culture that you're in justify you to giving in to God, to things that God has explicitly told you are not of Him. And he's saying these temptations that you are facing, they were beatable back then, and they're still beatable now. There's no excuses. They're still beatable. I loved a whole lot about Brock's sermon last week, but one of the parts I really thought was good was when he was talking about kind of the arrogance that we come at, that we think that the people that went before us in our family, they had these struggles, but that's not going to get me. I got it. And he said something like, they went through the Great Depression and they couldn't get it. You think you got it without doing any work on yourself? You think you could get it? I thought that was great. I think Paul's kind of doing the same thing here. I think he's saying, especially, look at verses 1 through 4 in 1 Corinthians 10. When he lists off these incredible spiritual accomplishments of the people in the wilderness, and they still fell. Look at what he says. I don't want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud. They all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses and the cloud and the sea, and they ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink. In other words, these people followed the cloud by day and the fire by night. These people walked through a parted sea. These people ate food that fell from the sky. They drank water that came from a rock. Those are some big spiritual accomplishments. And Paul says, and they still fell. They still had these temptations. After all the incredible things that they got to be a part of, they still fell. And Paul's saying, don't think you're better than them. Don't think you're smarter than them. Don't think you're more developed than them, more discerning than them. Be careful. That's why you get in verse 12. Therefore, let anyone that thinks they stand take heed, lest he fall. Don't make the mistake of thinking that you're automatically smarter than people in the generations before you just because you have an iPhone in your pocket. That's what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery, this idea that people who came before us are not as smart as we are because we're higher up on the evolutionary chain or whatever. Paul's saying, be careful. These temptations that you have, that you're giving into, that you're giving yourselves license to indulge, these sins that you have a casual relationship with, they aren't new. They aren't unique to you. They're the same very things that wrecked the people back then. Don't think you're somehow better than they are. Don't think that you're immune to it. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to all mankind, past, present, future. But that gets us to the second part of our verse for today. First part, no temptation's overtaken you that's uncommon. Second part, but God is faithful and He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. So in the first part, you got no temptation's uncommon. Don't overestimate yourself. You're not as strong as you think you are. Be careful. Second part, you've got, but God is faithful. You got this. It's in your ability to fight it. You kind of get whiplash a little bit because it's like you got this yin and yang thing going, okay? You got hey, you check yourself before you wreck yourself. You're not as strong as you think you are. And also, encouragement. You can do this. The $1 million question is, though, he says, God's not going to let you be tempted in a way that's beyond your ability. What does your ability mean? I guess what I'm saying is, like, in what manner is it within our ability to conquer these sins? How do we conquer these sins? Do we do it? Are we to be stronger than these temptations? Are we to overpower them? Are we to outlast these temptations? Are we to outsmart these temptations? Are we to outmaneuver these temptations? In what manner is it in our ability to fight these temptations? That's the $1 million question for me, because I have faced temptations that's like, I don't think I can take this. And I know you have too. So what does it mean that we have the ability? I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I don't think that when Paul says you will never be tempted in a way that's beyond your ability to endure, I don't think he's saying that you should be able to just flat-footed, just by sheer willpower, be able to overpower any temptation that comes at you. I don't think that's what he's saying. I don't think he's saying you should be able to face it head on. I don't think that's what he's saying. A long time ago, when I was first starting at Coleman's Printing, Andy was showing me how to operate a particular piece of equipment, one of the most dangerous in the building. It was a very old press, no safety guards on it, flywheel exposed. You could get sucked in. It could kill you 100 different ways. And Andy's showing me how to operate this thing, and I've never done anything like this before. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like, look at this thing. This press will kill you. Don't be scared. It'll kill you. Don't be scared. Respect it. It'll kill you. Don't be scared. Respect it. I think fighting temptation is very similar to that. We know that temptation in and of itself is not a bad thing. Jesus was tempted. Don't be scared, but it will kill you. It will kill you. I think it's the same way with temptation. For you to be able to fight it well, when you have to have a right perspective on what it actually is. And that perspective informs how you are to engage with it, how you are to fight it. With that piece of equipment in the shop, when I had the respect that I was like, okay, this thing will kill me if I put my hands in the wrong places, if I do the wrong things, if I try to do whatever, when I had that respect that this thing will kill me, when it was time for me to master that piece of equipment, I did not master it by trying to wrestle it with my own strength. I would have lost. I mastered it by a series of strategic and intentional adjustments and touches. It's the same with fighting temptation. You don't master it by sheer force. You master it by intentional, strategic maneuvers. Strength doesn't come from like your brute strength. It comes from knowing, it comes from self-awareness. It comes from humility. It comes from knowing your limits. It comes from knowing where you are most likely to fail and what areas you're strong in, and then building up your defenses in those areas that you know that you are weak. That's where strength comes from. And you don't fight temptation in arenas where you know you will lose. You don't play by its rules. You don't have to. You fight it in arenas where you can win. Humility is the key to fighting temptation. As a matter of fact, when we embrace the perspective that Paul is giving us in this passage, when he's talking about like, hey, these people struggled with the same temptations, it wrecked them, don't be the same. I think humility might be the only thing that we have going for us that they didn't have. Because after all, like we look at it and they didn't have a healthy fear of what that behavior could cause. We do. We've seen it wreck people. We've seen it wreck our family members, people that we love, people who may be stronger than we are, that succumb to it. We've seen the wreckage it brings. We know that it can kill us because we've seen it happen. We have our own family history. We've seen the patterns of brokenness that have destroyed the people we love, and we know that we're not better than they are. And that humility, knowing that the temptation can kill us, is our greatest strength. Our ability, as it says in the text, as Paul says, to fight temptation is not necessarily about brute strength, but rather humility and self-awareness. You remember learning about the American Revolutionary War in school? These ragtag American militias, they're going up against the greatest army in the world at that time, the British Army. And they were outmatched by the British in every conceivable way. I mean, the British had more men. The British had better weapons. The British had better training. The British had cooler uniforms and cooler accents. They had more money, guns, ships. They were every conceivable way. They were disadvantaged. And so, you'll remember from your history class that one of the main ways that the American militias overpowered the British Army is by using guerrilla warfare, right? The British Army was used to fighting brute force against brute force. Standing on level ground, we're just driving through each other. May the best man win. We're going to fight like honorable people. And the Americans are like, we can't take them like that. We know we can't take them like that. And so they're hiding in the bushes and stuff, sneak attacking. They changed the rules. I think maybe we could learn something about fighting temptation from guerrilla warfare, of all things. Here's what I'm getting at. And this is the part that I think this is for somebody, okay? Maybe you have a particular sin or stronghold in your life, a pattern of sin that you just can't get freedom from. And when you read this verse, if you are being mastered by a sin cycle, I would imagine you are acquainted with this verse. I would imagine you've gone to it in times of trouble. And maybe your interpretation of it is, when you read this verse, your takeaway is, okay, God won't let me be tempted beyond my ability, so I should be able to say no to blank. And that's true. You should be able to say no to it. But here's the thing. Nobody ever said that you had to fight that head on. Nobody ever said you had to fight it by its rules. You can't fight your temptations head on any more than David could have taken Goliath in an arm wrestling match. You can't fight your temptations head on any more than Joshua could have taken Jericho head on. You can't take your temptations head on any more than Moses could have fought Egypt and the armies of Pharaoh head on. It's not about brute force. It's about strategy. It's about leverage. It's not about power, it's about planning. When you're fighting temptation, and hear me say, I'm not advocating for a small God view. God absolutely can rescue you from your temptation, but don't be lazy about it. Don't just stay in the same place and just be like, God, rescue me from this. Be creative. Find some high ground. Change the scenery a little bit. Stop being mentally lazy and saying, well, there's only one way to fight this thing. And if I fight it I just got to keep fighting it this same way and keep losing. This is something I feel like I've learned the hard way. I'm still learning it the hard way. Lust is a stronghold for me. Having lustful eyes has been since I was in high school. And one area that I kept failing in my walk was I would be good for a long time, and then for some reason I would have like an off day. I would be home by myself, nothing to do. I would be idle, and my temptation to look at pornography would just like skyrocket. Be at home. And oftentimes that temptation felt very much like it was too much for me to bear. Like at the time I would have been like, I think this verse is not true, because it felt like somebody was pushing me into it. I would sit at home and pray with my phone in my hands. God, please help me to not succumb to this. God, please help me not to do this. Please help me to overcome this. And like the laptop's right there, sitting in my dark house. And then one day it hit me like a ton of bricks. Maybe just leave the house. Maybe just go somewhere. Do something, anything. Maybe instead of trying to overcome the temptation by your own just flat-footed strength, just like, I'm going to fight it. Maybe a better strategy would be to find ground where the fight isn't so hard. Listen to me. Whatever the stronghold is in your life, whatever the addiction is in your life, Whatever the main thing is that's pulling you away from life with God and is destroying your soul, hear me say, you don't have to fight temptation by its rules. You don't have to fight temptation in an arena where it has every possible advantage. You can change the battleground. Try a little guerrilla warfare. Get creative. It doesn't have to be a head-on struggle. Find some leverage. Play to your strengths. Leave the house. Call a friend. Be so uncomfortably honest and awkward with somebody that you trust that the temptation has no choice but to wither and die in the light that you're shining on it. Stop trying to fight the devil in the dark. You probably won't win if you're fighting the devil in the dark. That's where he thrives. Because the truth is, and here's the deal, most of the time, it's more wise to escape temptation than to overpower it. That's why we get the third part of the verse. Paul tells us the way we endure temptation is by finding the way of escape that God has provided. Whenever you are tempted, God provides the way to escape it every single time. And the escape is how we endure. It's not our own willpower. And that's the thing. I think the main reason it took me so long to realize, just leave the house, just come up with a different plan, go outside, find something to captivate your heart and your soul and your emotions and do something else. I think the reason it took me so long to realize that was the approach is because deep down, I wanted that temptation. I wanted to succumb to that temptation. I wanted to do a little dance with it. I wanted to fight it for a little while, but ultimately succumb to it. Deep down, that's what I wanted. I think sometimes we look harder for the temptation than we do for the way out of it. I think sometimes we're more creative in finding new ways to be tempted and new ways to manage our temptation than we are in finding a way out of temptation. I think we put more creativity into getting in the temptation than we do to getting out of it. We're crafty like that. We play tricks on our own minds. We orchestrate our own circumstances to lead us straight into the dark where the devil thrives, and then we fall and we're like, I had no idea this would happen. But what if we reversed it? What if we looked harder for the way of escape than we looked for the way in? Every time you're tempted, God has provided a way of escape. That you might endure it. But here's the thing about a way of escape, you have to look for it. That requires you not being on mental autopilot. It requires some mental energy. It requires some creativity. It requires you being willing to change your plans on the fly. It requires some open-mindedness. So when you find yourself in temptation, look for the way of escape and look harder for the way of escape than you look for the way into temptation. Band, y'all can come back up. I want y'all to listen to me intentionally here, okay? I know they're getting set, and I know we're past time. If you are in the heat of battle with a particular temptation, I don't care what it is, it could be anxiety, worry, it could be an addiction, it could be lust, it could be whatever. If you feel like you can't get victory in that thing, I want you to do a couple things. Paul's given us the roadmap. First, I want you to look at that sin, that temptation for what it is. Recognize, respect it. It can kill you. Don't be scared. But also remember, this isn't beyond your ability. This fight is winnable. And you hold those two things in tension. Don't overestimate yourself. This has taken out people before you that may have been stronger than you, but this fight is still winnable. And then you search for the way out of that temptation harder than you search for the way into it. Be creative. Try a little guerrilla warfare. And the last thing I want you to do is I want you to give yourself some grace. Because Lord knows God's given you some grace. And He knows what it is to drive this machine that you're driving. He knows what it is to be tempted. He's walked in human form. He knows what it is to fight temptation because He's been in your shoes. And so give yourself some grace because becoming like Jesus is a process. I want to close with this verse from Hebrews 4, and then I'm done. This is Hebrews 4, 15 and 16. It says this, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, and is yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." Let's draw near to the throne of grace with confidence, friends. Let's worship.